So this is the map of the month for November 2011. It is a single-player map for Half-Life called Surfacerun by noSICK, and you may recognise the name noSICK for him being the winner of the previous map of the month, October 2011, with his multiplayer map Dystopia, which I also reviewed, somewhat half-arsedly. Is that a word? It is now. It's nice to review a single-player map for a change. The first one, and only one I've done this year, was Beach Party back in January. I mean, I know I only reviewed it a couple of months ago, but it's nice to do a single-player map. That way it's possible to give a fair review in terms of gameplay as opposed to trying to guess what multiplayer gameplay would be like. So let's take one of Archie's patented hot drink slurps and take a look at the map. That's a weird thing to say. It's actually cold now. So let's look at architecture. Overall, it's very nice. It's got a very sort of classic feel. I think what noSICK has gone for is a sort of classic Half-Life style map. It's all based in sort of underground tunnels with a few labs thrown in here and there. He's used a little bit of everything in terms of the Half-Life library. You've got tunnels, labs, vents, Zen, a little bit of everything thrown into this one small map. It's a little dull when you compare it to the work he has achieved in his multiplayer maps like Abduction and FY Dystopia, but because of the look and feel he was going for with the classic Half-Life, he's actually done really well. There are only a few minor annoyances, and this is purely from a personal perspective. One thing is the big chunky red lights he seems to have stuck everywhere. They just look way too big for me, and in terms of small detailing in the map, they just look odd. So let's look at texturing. In terms of the textures used, he's genuinely just stuck to the stock Half-Life textures, which is all well and good, apart from the fact that the textures are now borderline 15 years old, and they're starting to get a little bit overused, which is an odd thing to say considering he's mapping for Half-Life, but you've seen them so many times in other maps. They are just quite boring to look at these days. However, I will say that he has used the textures sickeningly well. There's not a single one that looks out of place, everything's aligned, there's no odd transitions, there's trims where there should be trims, it's just all very well put together, and that's why I'm giving it such a high rating. But it would have been nice to see some custom content maybe. In terms of lighting, I'd say he's got it spot on. There's absolutely nothing out of place, except for the fact that, like I said earlier, there's some really chunky red lights in some places. Now, I know that shouldn't really affect the score in terms of lighting, but again, I think they just look kind of odd in some of the places he's stuck them. His use of ambience is absolutely fantastic. Most maps I've reviewed this year haven't bothered with it at all, and his previous map, which I reviewed, FY Dystopia, only had 2 sounds used, and both of them were a little overpowering in the way they were used. In this map, they are absolutely spot on. There's a new sound in every single room you go into. None of them are overpowering or too loud. You hardly even notice them. And I know that doesn't sound like a great thing, but if you're playing through the map and you aren't noticing the sounds, it at least means they're not irritating you. But at the same time, they're not out of place either. In terms of the gameplay of this map, he's gone for a very classic feel. There's a little bit of everything that was in Half-Life. There's a section where you have to drain some toxic fluid to gain access to a couple of scientists. Those scientists you then have to escort to a door to unlock it so you can proceed to the end of the map. There's a lot of backtracking in there, which usually would be really irritating. However, he's kept the map fresh by spawning enemies in places you've already been when you have to revisit them. One thing I will complain about is his use of invisible walls. There are other ways to restrict a player, and while I can understand the Zen section, he didn't necessarily want players to fall off and obviously see areas of the map which he hadn't textured or used the null texture. But at the end of the day, I think if a player is stupid enough to wander off the edge of an island floating in Zen, they should be punished rather than restricted. Also, it kind of limits the use of Easter eggs, and as far as I'm aware there aren't any in this map because he's literally put an invisible wall everywhere he doesn't want the player to go. I think adventurous players should be rewarded to a point with Easter eggs. Obviously don't go overboard with it, but at the same time they should also be punished for doing things that would be considered quite stupid, rather than just being stuck by an invisible wall. Another thing I'll say about this map is that while backtracking is involved, you can exploit it somewhat. The button which flushes the toxic sludge can actually be pushed from the other side of the window when you're not supposed to be able to access it. This means you can literally skip half of the map, which is a shame. While this is a limitation of the engine and not noSICK's mapping ability, I still think that some effort should have been taken to make sure that that didn't happen. Another issue I have with this map is the NPC escorting section. While it is done very well, escorting NPCs in the Gold Source engine is like nothing ever. I was very much conscious of them not following me all the time, and that got on my nerves a little bit. Also, not something I noticed myself, but Archie did, is that there are no autosaves in the map. Now, I didn't notice it because I didn't die, but people who aren't very good at playing Half-Life like Archie would probably suffer in this area. Overall, I'd say this map is a great tribute to the way gaming used to be, for better and for worse, and I feel that anyone who's looking for that sort of Half-Life based nostalgia trip should definitely download this map and give it a try. Fantastic work. Like I say,